Hello everybody and welcome to Alternative Interactions. I'm Gary. Please like, share and subscribe. It really helps my channel grow and I really do appreciate it. Yesterday, sorry, getting your glasses straight. Yesterday I did a show with Richard Cardinal, Rocking Pandora's Box, and from that show I spoke a little bit about some of the history, Tartarian type history, and how I believe some of the stuff really wasn't quite correct. Now, I decided to relook at some of my notes because during the show I used my memory off some of the notes, and looking at some of the notes I thought that's quite interesting about some of the American history that really isn't quite correct. Not what we've been taught at school, certainly in the United Kingdom. I'm not sure what you get taught at school in America or Canada or Australia about America, or United States of America, Northern America, but certainly what I've been told in my history lessons was complete bunkum, and that's a very polite word of saying rubbish. So I put a slideshow together of a few things, a few questions I've got, and hopefully you guys will enjoy the questions and it'll get the old grey matter thinking about what you've really been told by the establishment. So I've got notes everywhere, old notes and newer notes, so hopefully I won't get confused and I'll get this bang on, but we shall see. So without further ado, I shall go on to my presentation, and we can go in for a thought-provoking questions of the narrative, the official narrative. So thank you very much, and here we go. Okay, first of all I'm going to start with UK history, and I don't know if you've got the same in America, but they can't even agree on what Christopher Columbus looked like, even though his name wasn't Christopher Columbus. It was Christopher Columbi, or Christophe Columbi, who was Spanish and of Jewish origin, and only sailed to Cuba when he was kicked out of Spain, along with many other of his colleagues, for ripping people off financially in the financial sector, which is a very similar story to what we hear around that time by many of the money people. I think from memory they were charging something like 33 or 30% interest on loans, when, as we know, interest is illegal. So eventually, obviously, the Spanish government couldn't sustain and support what they were doing, and he was kicked out with several shiploads of different ships, or quite a few ships I believe, and they set sail and went to Cuba. Now, I believe very firmly that Christophe Columbi, or Christopher Columbus as we now know, because we can't have a Spanish sounding name being taught in schools in the UK, when we were taught that, or the assumption is that he is English or United Kingdom, where he wasn't. I think he was born in Italy, and ended up in Spain, and then escaped from Spain to the Americas or Cuba. So I tried to look up the portraits of Christopher Columbus, and there's about 6 or 7 different portraits of 6 or 7 different looking people. But we'll take this one because for those who understand their hand gestures, he's showing a very interesting hand gesture, the M shape, and we see this even today in modern times. So yes, but For the record, Christopher Columbus discovered America in 1492. Yeah. He was the first person to go to America. First person to discover the Americas. He was the main man, did it all. So, I've got a few questions about that. You know what I'm like. This is The Curse of Oak Island. It's a TV programme. Very, very interesting programme. I like it a lot. And basically, these guys are looking for buried treasure underneath an island that was put there probably by Knights Templars, Knights of Malta, and other groups of people. But this is a screenshot which is very interesting. And I can't remember what season this is. Could be season 7, 8 or 9. I don't know. Can't remember. I've watched them all. And they're on season 12 now. So for 12 years they've been ripping this island to bits looking for treasure. And haven't found really anything. But so much documentation and so much interest around that. Where it was definitely one of the first bankers' river banks where they would bank their money. And obviously they would then get to see a teller. And the teller would tell you where they'd hidden the money, and they would go and get it for you, and such like. So what they're discussing, I can't quite recall now, but I did take these screenshots a while ago, and that is dated 1178 to 1180. There's no doubt that Oak Island was known, definitely in 1178 according to the Templar report. So what we're talking here is the Knights Templar in 1178 had documentation about Oak Island in Canada, North America. But Christopher Columbus discovered all this in 1492. Oh dear. There's a few hundred years going amiss there. I'm not quite sure what's going on. Very interesting. What's very interesting as well is on Oak Island they found a Norse or Viking arrowhead. They didn't, it was found before them, which is very interesting as well, because we weren't told that the Norse were there first. Now, I haven't got a screenshot of the Norse, but it's known that the Norse colonised, as in set up camps and bases and lived in North America and probably further down from Canada going down in the 10th century. So that's 500 years plus before Christopher Columbus supposedly discovered America. 500 years pre-Columbus, and a couple of hundred years later, or 100 or so years later, we have the Knights Templars involvement in America, in North America, hiding treasures from the Vatican and the persecution of the Vatican. Isn't that very interesting? As a little footnote for everybody, when the Templars were betrayed by the Vatican and the French government, and most of the Templars were tortured to death trying to find where they'd hidden the treasure, the tellers of the bank, they then changed their sigil and the Templars became the pirates, and they put up a skull and crossbone. And we still see a skull and crossbone in one of the fraternities in Yale, I believe, to this day. That's very interesting, isn't it? And that was a lovely little tangent. So there we go. So, what I want to talk about is New York, or New Amsterdam. This was the city of the Dutch West India Trading Company, and the Dutch West India, or India Trading Company was in competition and or was part of, I'm not certain because it gets very, very murky around this, of the Dutch East India Trading Company of the UK, or the British. But they were certainly squabbling over lands and doing deals and trade routes, as well as the piracy still from the Templars around this period as well. So there's an awful lot of stuff going on still around this period. But here we can see New York, the Hudson River, and Fort Amsterdam at the bottom here on this map of 1662, as Dirk Storm first knew it. Very interesting. 1662 this map goes back to, so a little bit after the Columbus fib, but certainly we can see roadways and all these things being built up on the end of this point. And here's another map of it in 1660, and we can see very clearly here the end of the island, the Star Fort, and this Star Fort's no longer there, it's been built over. But we have a big walled area. This is a big fortress with a Star Fort here. Very interesting. That I think the natives were issues as well as the English, clearly. Now, New Amsterdam, which is what New York was first called, was a 17th century Dutch settlement established in the southern tip of Manhattan Island that served the seat of the colonial government of New Netherland. It was used for trading, and it became a provincial extension of the Dutch Republic. So very important for the trading of timbers, furs, I would imagine precious metals as well. Now this is something I want to bring up because it's got some very interesting points here that again we will come back to later. But here we have a map of, you know, New Amsterdam, New York City, New Sweden. It's very interesting, isn't it? Delaware. Philadelphia, founded in 1682. Now, 30 settlers were brought to Delaware Bay in 1631. And he built a brick house. Built a brick house in 1631. Now I want you to remember this. It's very important. The rest of it's quite, you know, it's interesting that they upset the locals, and they didn't last very long. But they built a brick house. So the first thing that you do when you colonise somewhere with 30 settlers is you build a brick house. Did they have pallets of bricks ready made on the boat, or did they start to build pits, fire pits, the clay out of the ground? I'm not sure. Interesting though, isn't it? Again, this matches a lot of the history you get around the world. Now, go back to New Amsterdam or Fort Amsterdam. And again, we have some very interesting sort of looks at. So we'll just go through this and then I'll start reading some of my notes. But at the direction of the Dutch West India Company, Vulhurst was replaced as governor by appointed Petter. It would be Peter, but it's Petter, I should imagine, being Dutch. I'm not even going to try the last name, who arrived in 1625. And they arranged a meeting with the local Indian chiefs to negotiate the purchase of Manhattan Island before any settlement of an erection of a fort was to occur. So basically in 1626, 1625 they've come onto the land, and this is an illustration of above here, to come onto land to do a deal with the Indians to buy purchase the land off them before they can start building stuff. 1625, 1626. Okay, but Fort Amsterdam on Manhattan Island was the greater Dutch colony of New Netherlands, was chartered by Dutch West India Company in 1621. Before Fort Amsterdam was constructed, the Dutch settlers erected a large stone building on the future location of the fort that served as a meeting house. And it was surrounded by 30, and I like the number 30, don't we? Makeshift dwellings made from timber and bark, as finishing building materials were scarce. It's very interesting. Very interesting. Building materials were scarce. But here we're in negotiations to build on the Indians' land, so we don't meet the fate of the previous people on the slide. But we've already built something. Probably this house is what they're talking about. Stone building. Where did they get the stone from? Building materials are scarce, but they have enough materials, cement or mortar or wattle and daub, wherever they made this lime plaster mortar, and they made a very big, I assume this is the depiction of the stone house, a very big stone house in the footprint of what was to be the fort. Well, those dates of 1626 don't match the 1621 dates. And they've just told us they didn't have any materials. This is 16... Oh, let me just go to the next one. This is 1636. I knew I'd forget. And in 1636, this is what the fort looked like in completion. This is a stone fort. So 1626 they purchase it, and 10 years later have built a huge stone fort. Trouble is, on this picture they forgot to put the stone building in the middle of it. Look. Maybe they took it down. I don't know. Nice Dutch windmill. Houses around. Star fort. But in 10 years they built a star fort. It's very impressive. Especially when you know how many people lived there. They had 100 soldiers. They literally had a handful of people. think 270 something people built that in 10 years, while they built all these houses as well. Oh, look. So a year later we now have the building again. But the year before there's no building in the middle, but we're told that there was a building in there by the official narrative. There's a lot of buildings here, a lot of extra buildings, gone up very, very quickly in 1 year from that, which is 1 year previously, to that. Okay. Yep, I knew it was around 270. So the New Amsterdam settlement had a population of approximately 270 people, including infants. In 1642, the new director Wilhelm Keph decided to build a stone church within the fort. Well, is that not a church dated 1637? So there was 100 soldiers that I would assume would be part of the 270. So that leaves 170. Must have been a one lady for every man, perhaps, and the rest children. So they built all of that, all the houses. It's very impressive. And they had no materials, remember, because we've already been told they have no materials. More questions than answers, I would say. And here we go. This is looking over the Star Fort. I assume this is the church, but again, we don't have that tower in this one. We have the windmill. I'm not quite sure which one would be the church because we can't really see in this picture. But look how these gardens are laid out. How did they get so high to be able to do an aerial shot of this? Artist. This is 1830s. 16. It's 1640s. A couple hundred people, 300 people living in this area. Yeah, that's feasible. That's the windmill. At least the windmill's been consistently there. And our Star Fort. The Star Fort in this picture is slightly different. I think that could be wood, because it's got uprights, so that could be part of the wooden structure as it was being built, perhaps, because it's a year earlier. I find it very confusing, and I want to know how 270 people made or built a huge stone Star Fort, fed themselves and did everything else. In 10 years, all of this has been made and done. Now, while we're on this one, let me just read a few facts. So, Staten Island was named in 1609 by Henry Hudson. Around 1680, the first brick or stone buildings appeared in the history books. Okay, so we're moving on a bit now. The Conference House on Staten Island, and this is the Conference House on Staten Island, was built in 1675. Again, not a lot of people about at that time, but that's a very impressive building to be built. But the thing I noticed about this immediately is it's mud flooded. We have windows under the ground. Why would you build a basement? Why would you go to the effort of digging a huge basement out and then building up from that? Although they've done a good job with this stonework and an arch here, why would there be a blocked off arch here? It's mud flooded, clearly, from the day it was built. Perhaps this would have been an extension off the roof level, and due to the mud flood they then put a wooden structure on top to gain the 2 floors that they missed. Beautiful building. I mean, look at the craftsmanship in that. Built in 1675. Very impressive, isn't it? Now this is another very interesting house, which is another early one, because we're looking at early builds now in New York State as well, the whole of New York. So this is a very early build, and it says 1679, but actually the building was built, the brick building, which is this part, was built in 1663, and the extension was finished in 1679. And so this was the original building of 1663 with the extensions on it. And it is the same building. It doesn't look the same, but you can see it. It's the same building. I don't know when this photograph was taken, but what I'm told they're the same building. I'm shown they're the same building, but they don't look the same. But this is different angles. One's from the road, one's from the back garden. So it's hiding the extension off the back that's been put on. But something that strikes me on these pictures is, you know, there's no old trees around it really, is there? Some new sort of trees, and it's obviously winter time, but it's not really a now these trees that were small trees at the front are that big. Also got a basement, an underground area, so I wonder if this was really this, or it's been mud flooded as well. But this is one of the oldest surviving examples of a brick built house. It's very interesting that on Staten Island in 1698 the entire island's population was 727 people. This figure includes 10% who were slaves. Now, more on the older buildings. This church was founded, that word founded, not built, but founded, in 1727 and finished in 1731. That took them a long time to build a church like that, when they can build a star fort in 10 years, which is much bigger with less people. It's very interesting, isn't it? Very interesting. I included this so you could see it's here, because you wouldn't have been able to read that. But that's a very impressive building, neither. And we have coach and horses. Very impressive. There you go, New York there, just so you can see. It's 1900 at the bottom. I'm not sure what that is, whether that was printed in 1900, but the original is definitely this date here. Now, we have some buildings in the background of the churches, and we have buildings, quite big buildings, at the date of 1727, 1731. This is a view of New York in 1775, and look at all these houses, all these churches. This one is of a classic European church. Huge. I mean, you can see that it's starting to look like a modern metropolis of a city. Very impressive. So what was the population of New York City in 1776? It was 25,000 people. So there was 25,000 people living in this area here, or above. Now they've done a lot of building in those years, haven't they? A lot of building. Yeah, 25,000 people in New York City. Bearing in mind they've gone from, in 1698, 727 people to 25 in 1776. Now, in 1700, the settlement formerly known as New Amsterdam had an estimated population of 5,000 people. So we have two figures of populations. $727 people or 5,000, but it's an about. Which one's right, I don't know. And again, this is what we get all the way through when we're looking at this sort of stuff. This church is included. We have another nice building here, and we have a waterfront here with some very nice Dutch style houses. Now this is New York again, and we can see all the churches. That big house that we saw previously was there in the top corner. This is 1730. What's the population again? 5,000 people. Might have grown to 10,000 by that time. But they're doing a lot of building. Doesn't make sense. Don't know where they get the materials from. Now, let's move forward a little bit. And this is a very interesting building. This is the Bowery, and it's one of the oldest brick buildings as a part of a block in New York, and it was built between 1785 and 1789, so it's one of the oldest brick built. Well, these look brick built to me, potentially. That's in 1730. Stunning building, nevertheless. Now, I have decided to look at the battle for independence, the War of Independence, which was 1775 to 1783. Bearing in mind this house was built between 1785 and 1789, so just after. And what I'm going to show you is pictures of the time, official pictures of the time during the War of Independence. And what we see is a wattle and daub house next to a brick built house, or stone house next to another stone house with a wattle and daub. Now this looks very, very, very much like a very old United Kingdom type building or street, but it's America. And here we go. This is a very nice picture. We have these massive Tartarian buildings, type buildings, with all the pillars and the beautiful road. Look, and look at all these red brick buildings. I'm not interested in these people, I'm interested in the buildings. These buildings were built during and just after the War of Independence. Mass building straight after a war when the country's on its knees. Here we go again. Look at these buildings. This one's clearly very Dutch in style, very Dutch. Cathedral or church in the background, look. These buildings were built by people with horse and carts. Here's a battle scene. And look at these buildings. Red brick. But according to the narrative, America had very few bricks in this time. New York, the first of the red brick buildings were being built after this period of the War of Independence. But here we clearly see, during the battles of the War of Independence, brick built buildings with modern tiles. Very interesting. Another one. Look, huge amounts of building. Huge amounts of building. It's like a church spire there going up. And they're not small. I mean, look, these are very big, tall buildings. Again, out in the countryside, a big red brick building. A big red brick building, Dutch style. A barn or a building. Brick. 1, 2, 3 story high, big brick buildings. But according to the narrative, these buildings didn't exist during the time of the war. So again, we'll look at what was the population in New York City. It's 25,000 people in 1776. So during the battles that we've just seen, they were building row after row after row of 4 story buildings in brick, manufacturing the bricks, making the bricks, digging the pits out, full works, with 25,000 people. The city was growing exponentially. I find that hard to believe. $1790. Apparently there was then 33,000. 1800, 10 years later, it's nearly doubled. And 1810, a few years later, I mean, look at the growth. It's exponential. These people would have been living in slums unless they were building houses like it was going out of fashion. And I don't see any evidence of slum buildings in New York City. I see a metropolis city of old brick buildings that's been there for a very, very long time. And we've also got to remember, before we go back to this period here, when we're looking at these buildings here, the War of Independence, 1775-1783. When we start looking at the cowboy era, someone like Jesse James, who lived between 1847 and 1882, out in the Wild West, and all the buildings and all the TV that we see is wooden built properties. So why did, from the 1800s onwards, New York, all the big cities get built, and then suddenly the only way they could build houses was to build them out of wood? I don't get that. Very strange. Very, very strange. Now, we're going to look somewhere else now. And we're going to look at Castillo de San Marcos in Florida, which is St. Augustine. Because we have another very, very curious one. And St. Augustine's here in Florida, by the way. Follow the red dot. Now, this is a star fort again, and you'll see some amazing pictures of this star fort shortly. Okay? But I thought I'd show you the slide so you can read it. It was designed by a Spanish engineer, Ignacio, in 1672. 107 years after the Spanish founding again. So that's a 1560s, isn't it, when they founded it? This is when Florida was part of the Spanish Empire. Obviously, Robert Sears, or Sears, in 1688 destroyed much of St Augustine and damaged the existing wooden fort. So they had a wooden fort there. So they then work proceeded under the administration in 1671 to build the stone fort that we see today. And the first stone was laid in 1672 in Castillo de San Marcos. And it was completed in 1695. 23 years. Very impressive. And this is it. 23 years they built this massive star fort. I mean, I don't know where they got the stone from again. That's a better picture of it. Look at the size of this thing. All these stones. All the stones on the seafront or the river frontage, the different levels, all dug out. Done by horse and cart, you know. Even if they did actually have horses and carts back then. I wouldn't have thought they had many. Probably mules and sleds. And they built that. Absolutely, stunningly amazing. Now in around 1650, in this area, the population was 500 to 600 people. So again, I shall say this again. In 1650, remembering it was finished in 1695, laid in 1672. In 1650, a few years before they started work on it, the population of this area was 500 to 600 people. That's very impressive. And only by 1763 they had 1,400 people living there. So the growth rate is not the same as New York. Far from it. The Indian population in 1675 was 90 people. And what's interesting about 1763, when there was only 1,400 people there, is the UK gained control of that area again from the Spanish. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. When we look at the population levels of people at the time, they're extremely low. They don't have roadways or highways. They have horses and mules and carts. They don't have big quarries. Where did they get the stone from? Was it taken by ship? How many shiploads of material would be required to make a fort like that? And there was probably 1,000 people. And out of that 1,000 people, 500 would have probably been women. 400 men and maybe 100 children, maybe more children. There may have only been 300 men, but 300 men built that in 20 odd years. Now I have a statistic for New York State, so the entirety of New York State, taking a step back, because we know population in 1790 in the city of New York is 33131. Very interesting number, but that's the city itself of New York. But the entire state of New York is slightly different. Now, the population of the state of New York in 1790 was as follows in the breakdown: 83,700 men and 152,000 women. And so that's a ratio of nearly 2 women to 1 men. Now it doesn't say whether they're adults or children or infants. So when we take the 1790 figure of the New York population, you've probably got, on the ratios of that, probably 13,000 men and 20,000 ladies, females. How did they build all these places? How did they build the bricks? How did they fire the kilns? How did they make it all? I would really like to know. When we go back, all these beautiful buildings, look, how did a handful of people, 10,000 men, build this? Yes, we've got some ships. We don't have the people. We don't have... We're building. Where did the materials come from? The New Amsterdam settlement, 270 people in 1642, to build this. Like I said on the Rocking Pandora's Box, I believe that these places were already built and they needed doing up, not building. Or they needed digging out, and these people dug the buildings out and repurposed them. They founded them, refounded. And with that, hello. So I hope you find that quite interesting, because the amount of building work going on, the materials needed to build a property like that, hundreds of buildings, star forts, with a handful of men, doesn't make sense. They don't have engined vehicles. They don't have lorries. They don't have roadways. They have ships coming in to supply them. But the dates don't make sense. Nothing makes sense in the history when we start really looking at it. Because for me, nothing is logical. I think logically, and none of it is. I cannot imagine how long it would have taken to build a star fort in the 1600s with a handful of men, basic tools. It just doesn't make sense. So I hope you found that interesting, and like me are quite perplexed over how they managed to do this, because I don't get it. There's more questions than answers in any of the history when we look at it. So thank you very much for looking. Thank you for joining me in this journey, and I hope you enjoyed it. So please again, like, share and subscribe. I really do appreciate your support. And on this one, I shall say goodbye till next time. Thank you very much. Bye everybody.